Ilana Braverman joins me next. Ilana is the Director of Outreach at Farm Forward and Better Food Foundation. Ilana also leads the Default Veg campaign, which is going to form some of the knowledge that she shares with you today. Ilana is going to lead this session, but I would really like to encourage you to use the Slido tool to write your questions and participate, and I'll make sure that I'll return in about half an hour. I'll be standing by, but with camera off, to help facilitate that conversation and get your questions answered. So for the next 30 minutes, I don't see Ilana yet, so I may need to buy us a little bit of time. Oh, there you are. Hi, Ilana. Nice to see
Hello.
you. Hi. You were lurking quietly in the background. It's lovely to see you. I'm going to hand this over to you with just a few opening comments. This is really about questioning the and shifting food trends and what we see as our default options, which is a really interesting space that a lot of people find themselves in, especially in those conversations where we aren't sitting in the same place in terms of our values and our choices.
Right.
Some of what you're asking here is what would happen if we shifted the default to a plant-based diet, as it already is in many cultures around the world. You're going to speak about social norms and how we change some of those to ensure a resilient future. That's an awful lot to squeeze into 45 minutes. We're so glad to have you here. I'm going to pass this over to you, and then I'll be back in about 30 minutes time with some of the questions from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to, if someone could enable the screen sharing, I'm not able to do that right now. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this session today. As was already stated, Default Veg is about reframing the conversation. It's about talking about the fact that in our society today, we already have a default. This isn't introducing something new. It's just saying that our factory farming is our default in today's society. Factory farmed animal products are our default on menus. And so what would happen if we change that default to plant-based meals instead, giving diners the choice to opt in to animal products instead of having to opt out of them? I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important. I think we're talking about food, especially in this year, even though it can seem like there are so many other things going on we need to focus on. Then a little bit about food trends and default and behavioral nudges in general, and how those two ideas sort of come together to create default veg. Then I'll talk a bit about the research behind default veg and some studies that have been done, how to implement default veg in your communities, which is the biggest part of my presentation today. A little bit about impacts, just some fun facts you might not have heard of before about the impact of defaulting to plant-based meals, some resources, and then hopefully we'll have time for lots of questions and discussion. So I like to start off just talking about the issues that are existing specifically within this year due to being in a pandemic and having factory farming continue to grow and grow and grow. One of those issues is obviously public health concerns, right? From having animals crammed into small spaces and the public health risks that come along with that. Another is worker labor issues. As I'm sure many of you saw earlier this year, this is just an example of an article that came out stating that Missouri pork plant workers can't even cover their mouths to cough. And this has led to so many devastating issues this year with many slaughterhouse and factory farm workers getting COVID-19 because of that. And then another quote here from Dr. Ari Bernstein at Harvard is that large livestock farms can also serve as a source for spillover of infections from animals to people. Less demand for animal meat and more sustainable animal husbandry could decrease emerging infectious disease risk and lower greenhouse gas emissions. So from a public health standpoint, from animals, workers, and the environment, now is the time to be focusing on food, because we are seeing that we are not great at dealing with pandemics. And if we want to prevent a future one from happening, if we want to mitigate climate change and we want to push more and more for worker justice, we have to move away from factory farming. And what better way to do that than by changing our norms in society so as not to tell people what to do, but just make it more normal to eat plant-based meals. So in terms of food trends, as I'm sure many of you on this call know, we've been moving towards more and more plant-based proteins in the last few years. And this is not a fad. This is definitely a trend that keeps moving in that direction. The CEO of Danone, which is one of the largest dairy companies in the world, is even seeing this trend and believes that flexibility in our diets towards shifting towards plant-based meals is fundamental for us. And Danone now owns Silk and Vega, which are two of the largest plant-based dairy companies in the world. So we're seeing that shift. In terms of behavioral nudges, Professor Richard Thaler, who many of you might have heard of, who won the Nobel in economics, stated that our inertia or our lack of wanting to do certain things has limited our participation in beneficial programs like retirement savings plans or school lunch programs. So he proposed that governments and employers should just make participation the default option. People are free to opt out, but the inertia is on the side of the preferred outcome. And so that's just saying that if there are places in society where we're having difficulty making certain choices that are better for sustainability, better for public health, we can use nudges as this way to kind of push us in the right direction while still preserving freedom of choice. And so this is a really great example when you think of organ donation. If when you turn 16 or when you turn 18 and get your license in the US, you have to check a box when you want, if you want to become an organ donor or sign a form or register in some sort of way, which is why, and this graph is just showing kind of across the board the differences, but in the US, for example, though 90% of US adults support organ donation, only 60% of us are registered organ donors. So that's a 30% difference in the amount of people that ideologically agree with organ donation, but but only 60% of us are signed up. And so that just shows the major gap in the differences there. And that's shown across the board in countries like Belgium, Austria, France, Hungary, where you're automatically an organ donor when you turn 16, but you have to opt yourself out if you don't want to be one. They see numbers much, much closer to 100%. So if you put those two ideas together, that plant-based food is trending, and also that defaults are a really powerful tool to shift social norms, you get default veg. And like I already said, the concept is super simple: offer plant-based meals by default and give diners the choice to add in meat or other animal products to their meal upon request. That's it. This is really easy for catering, conferences, and dining facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but even though we're not eating in large groups right now, this is an optimal time to be shifting for a food policy change, because then when we do go back to eating in large groups, we have set a new sustainable normal. It's not something we have to go back and change. It's something we can just go into right when we start eating in groups again. This is also one of the most inclusive ways to eat. How many people now that have either catered events or been to weddings and other conferences and things like that have seen that so many people have to opt out of the meal? They have to request vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, egg allergies, and have a separate meal. If you serve plant-based meals by default, you get rid of all those extra requests, and you just have, separate meals for folks that have specific allergies or that have opted into meat. So it makes it easier on the caterer's behalf as well. It's cost effective. Serving more plant-based meals, as we all know, is pretty much cost neutral. If not, it could actually save you money in certain cases. And it has a significant impact on our greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So in terms of some research that's been done, this first study, Emma Garnett and her colleagues at the University of Cambridge in the UK collected data on over 94,000 meals sold in 3 cafeterias at their university back in 2017. And what they found was that when the proportion of meatless options doubled from 1 out of the 4 to 2 out of the 4, overall sales remained constant, but the sales of the meat-containing meals actually dropped, and the sales of the vegetarian meals rose from 40 to 80%. And so when folks ever ask me the question, will students or will omnivores want to try more plant-based options? I think the answer is, if it's there and it looks delicious and it tastes delicious and it's labeled deliciously, they will want to try the plant-based meals. And then another study that was conducted a few years ago at Harvard was in a conference setting here. So The meat default was kind of the quote unquote normal option, where conference participants were given a registration form where the meat option was the default and they could opt into a plant-based meal. And then the experimental group was given a vegetarian default on the menu and they had to opt in for the meat meal. And as you can see, when meat was the default on a quote unquote regular menu, 76% of people stuck with eating meat. However, when we change that to a vegetarian default, only 32% of people actually opted in to eat meat. So that's a 43% increase in the amount of people eating vegetarian meals just by changing the default option on a registration form. And there was another peer-reviewed study conducted in Denmark as well a few years back that showed even greater results here. So across the board, you can see in all 4 experiments, we're seeing an approximately 80% increase in the amount of vegetarian meals served at this conference with the same methodology as the Harvard study, just by flipping the option and making the vegetarian option the default on the menu for the registration form. So this idea really works in a conference setting. Folks might want to ask during the Q&A section, are there any case studies in dining halls and other things like that? We were hoping to work with some before the pandemic happened, and then those have been put on hold. And so we are really looking forward to being able to study that soon and see and have some more data on how this plays out in a dining setting. But this can definitely work in all different types of settings, pretty much anywhere you serve food. And then this is just an example. In Europe, the city of Ghent adopted a campaign where they made vegetarian meals the default option on Thursday. They called Thursday Veggie Day in 30 of their publicly funded schools. And so if the students wanted to eat meat on that day, or if their parents insisted that they ate meat, they just had to signal it beforehand. But the result was that 94% of the students were eating vegetarian on Thursdays now. And so I think that just shows the power of being able to keep that freedom of choice, not telling people they can't have something, but the amount that humans want to stick with the status quo and eat the default option. Also, when something's the default option, people are more trusting that it's tasty and it's good and delicious, that everybody wants to eat it, instead of having to kind of gingerly check that box that says vegetarian on a menu when it's not being described, you don't know what it is, and it seems like the alternate option. So in terms of implementation, there are 3 main ways that we're working with Default Veg in communities right now. The first one is asking cafes to offer plant-based milks by default, or just eliminate their default at all and just ask consumers and customers what type of milk they'd like with their coffee instead of assuming a dairy default. Another big one is working with conferences and events for 2021 and beyond. So like I said earlier, obviously we're not meeting right now, but now is that time to be really thinking through, where are you involved in your community? Where are you involved in these conferences and events that are going to be happening next year, that you can bring up this idea now to shift the norm at your conference? And then organizations and offices, we've been working with a lot of universities right now with our student ambassador program, which I'll talk about in a bit. And this is the idea of getting an entire department at a university, getting an office or corporation or business to say that we are now Default Veg, which means for all of our future conferences, meetings, and events, we're going to be serving plant-based meals by default. And our team can help anybody with free consulting to help you with your menus, to help you develop that language, create a mission statement for your website, and things like that. So this is just an example. We worked with an American Lung Association event in 2019, and they said, I thought Default Veg was great. It was an easy opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint of their conference, as well as share a message around plant-based eating and sustainability to the audience, especially as it coincides with their initiatives. The participants loved the food and didn't even question the lack of animal products. And then Sketchpad, which is a Jewish co-working space in Chicago, has adopted Default Veg for all of their future meetings and events. And they said Default Veg has been great. Members really seem to like it and enjoy the new catering options. And remarkably, I haven't heard a single person complain about the shift. On the contrary, members have actually complimented the quality and variety of the new meals. And one member even told me that she is now trying to implement Default Veg in her own home. So those are just a couple of testimonials about Default Veg. And this one that I skipped over is a mission statement that Huxley College of the Environment recently adopted. This is an environmental department in a university that we asked if they'd be willing to go Default Veg. One of our student ambassadors did, and they were like, of course, like this totally aligns with our values. We're not telling people what they have to eat, but we're normalizing the most sustainable option, the option with the lowest greenhouse gas emission. This just aligns with everything we're working towards as a university. And so they have this statement on their website. And then a little bit just in terms of impact. I know we all know that plant-based meals are better for our health, better for animals, better for the environment, but these are just a couple of facts that I like to share. The Eat Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health has a statement on their website in their FAQ section that says, but wouldn't it be more effective to focus on reducing fossil fuel emissions? I get that question a lot, and I love the way they answer this question. They say the commission states very clearly that global decarbonization is necessary. Emissions must be halved by 2030, and net zero emissions should be achieved by 2050. However, even if all of those goals are achieved, but dietary patterns see no shifts, the world will fail to meet the Paris Agreement. So if anybody is ever questioning why you're working on food, why you're trying to implement a food policy in your community, show them this. We have to focus on food as part of our solution to climate change. 50 by 40, obviously that's their mission as well. And so this is just a great little push to show people that, you know, even if we do all of those other things that we need to be doing, which are great, we still have to focus on food. We can't just ignore it and keep eating as much meat as we want, because we're not going to meet the Paris Agreement if we do. And then when I'm working with schools mostly, but also offices, this is just a great little infographic to show that, let's say, especially this year, budgets are being cut for sustainability projects, for green energy projects. And so you might not have that money to change out the light bulbs, buy a new car that's electric, get solar panels, but you can change your food, and you can probably save a lot of greenhouse gas emissions by doing that. And so this is just a statistic about how many meals you can serve, which equals changing light bulbs. And so it can be a fun fact to share with folks to be like, there are other ways that are completely cost-free to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. And then in terms of food waste reduction, this is just an interesting fact that I like to share with folks. A lot of times we're hearing nowadays that folks want to shift from beef to chicken because chicken is more quote unquote climate friendly. I always say we want to shift from animal products to plant-based products, because regardless of which animal you're looking at, whether it be pigs, cows, chickens, fish, there are so many other issues that we're not looking at that are not great for the climate, are not great for public health. And so this is just an example. We raise 9 billion chickens in America every year. And about 10% of those birds do not even make it to the grocery store. So when folks are talking about composting and waste reduction and all of those things, I think that's awesome, but we're not thinking about what's going on behind the scenes. What's going on behind the scenes is that 5% of chickens are dying before they make it to slaughter because of the genetic issues and being crammed in such small spaces, the horrible health requirements that they have. And then about 5%, if not more, that's a very conservative estimate, either end up with spaghetti meat or woody breast syndrome, which means that their meat is either too stringy or too tough to be sold. And so 10% of chickens just don't even make it to grocery store or restaurant shelves, and they're getting thrown out. 10% might not seem like a big number, but when you're talking about 9 billion chickens, that's 900 million birds, and all of the resources, all of the feed, all of the water, all of the land, the transportation that went into creating them, not even getting into how horrible it is that those animals' lives are horrible and then also being wasted, is something to bring up when folks are talking about shifting towards more chicken, that it's a very wasteful product to switch to in terms of trying to reduce our food waste and our impact on our climate. So just to sum up here with some resources, As I mentioned earlier, the Default Veg team is available for free consultation for anybody who wants to help implement Default Veg. We'll help you with communications and media. We have all of our materials available for free on our website, defaultveg.org, which you can check out. We'd love to recognize organizations and groups on social media for going Default Veg. We also have a new recipe tool with almost 10,000 plant-based recipes on it, which is one of the largest that exists today. So if you're ever just at home and looking for some new plant-based recipes, definitely check out our site. And then last but not least, our ambassador program. So in terms of materials, these are just a couple of examples of really simple, easy for offices, for conferences. If someone's like, yeah, this is great, but how do I do it? What would this look like? This is a really easy one-page how-to guide on how to do that. And then an example of our recipe tool. And then the ambassador program is for anybody that wants to commit to getting one organization or event or department to commit to going Default Veg for an event or for their policy in general. You can sign up to become an ambassador program. We have office hours every few weeks for folks to come on and meet others in the cohort we have ambassadors from all over the world now. This program just launched a few months ago, but it's been really great to work with students and staff and faculty at universities and also community advocates, folks in businesses and corporations, try to get Default Veg implemented all over the world. And I just want to sum up here by quoting myself. I had the opportunity to give a TEDx talk last month, which was a really, really wonderful experience. If you want to check it out, the link's at the bottom of the page here. And I want to just stress this message that our food system is not inevitable. It is so far from it. I think at times we look and we think, wow, 70 billion animals are being slaughtered every single year. How am I ever going to make an impact on that? And then we can think about the fact that factory farming has been around for less than a century. And if it's been around for less than 100 years, we do have the opportunity to make this change. The power of defaults in our society currently are in the hands of large-scale animal agricultural corporations, but we can take that power back. We can take it back in our meals in front of us every day, in our communities, in our workplaces, and beyond, and kind of hit the reset button and give society the new normal that it needs. So with that, I will end here and stop for questions. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Ilana. That was absolutely fascinating and really a lot of information. The people have spoken. Our question board has lit up like a light on fire. If we were in the olden days where the lights would go on a phone, you know. So let's really just dive right in and make the most of the 25 minutes that we have left. Robert asks, Default Veg makes a lot of sense. It makes me wonder, why do we still struggle to apply behavioral science to change behavior more widely?
That is a big question. That's a good one.
It certainly is. I guess part of the place where you could even start is just where you're seeing that. Where is the resistance here?
Yeah. So one thing I will say just from my work with Default Veg in general, and then I'm happy to broaden it if there's more specifics to get into, is just that people seem to really love the idea of Default Veg and supporting it, but people are still scared to implement any sort of food policy within their organization just because it's not the normal thing to do yet. I think, in a few years from now, as this picks up and more environmental, health, educational organizations are saying, yeah, of course we want to align our food choices with our values, that it will become more normalized. But right now, even though the idea is so simple and I think so wonderful, folks still have a hard time thinking of any sort of change to the food they're eating because food is so personal. And that's been the pushback I've been seeing. But again and again, I just try to keep portraying the message that, we have to focus on food right now. If we don't focus on food right now, when is our next pandemic going to happen? And so just continuing to talk about, tradition can be adapted and we can eat delicious plant-based meals. Again, that point of preserving freedom of choice for everyone, but it's still going to take some time for people to get used to that shift.
Your next question is from Jacqueline, who wants to ask about how to spread the idea. And she's asking whether you pitch at cafes or restaurants and how other people can help.
Yeah, so I would say if you want to help, please register for our ambassador program and just get connected with us, because I can, go into certain restaurants, cafes, universities, etc., and try to make these changes, but they're going to mean so much more if an actual customer from that coffee shop is going in and saying, I come here every week and I would love to see this change. Or if you're a student at a university, you could ask your department. And that's where we've seen the most change here. And so I really encourage anybody that wants to implement this idea in their community to get in touch with us. We have a really short webinar about like how to be an ambassador. We can help you draft emails and things like that, but it means so much more coming from you and your community because you have that personal relationship with them, and we can help you with the tools to make that happen.
That segues so nicely into our next question, because there is an element of conflict that you're trying to give people skills to go around, kind of that's back into the conversation in a way that's comfortable for everyone, but we can still have a disagreement here. Becky is asking, what resistance do you face when trying to promote this idea? And what are the reasons and arguments that people give you when they say that they don't want to do this? And how do you overcome those?
Yeah. One of the biggest arguments I've had this year is we have so many other things to focus on. This is a long-term thing. I'll get back to you in a year. Or we're not hosting conferences or events, so I'm not going to deal with this right now. And one of the things I come back with most often is, especially for an example, for environmental organizations. There have been plenty that have responded to me that way. And I say, you know what? Choosing to hold off on this is just choosing to hold off on aligning your food choices with your environmental values. And don't the members of your organization want to see you talking about these issues and actually holding yourselves accountable for it, and not just, like supporting other places that are doing it or policies, but actually saying that your organization, also is aligning internally with these values. I think the for an environmental organization that's asking other places to do certain things and reduce their carbon emissions, if they themselves actually had an internal food policy that says, this is what we do, for example, at Better Food Foundation, it's a lot easier for me to come out and ask other people to do the same because our organization is aligning with those values. So I'd say that is probably the biggest issue that I'm facing throughout this year, and the messaging that I try to push when I get those types of responses.
Can you, I imagine that some of these conversations have been quite private with organizations. So if you can't name organizations, I understand, but I'm trying to imagine a success story. Like, is there something that you can tell us about where you felt that conversation started out that way, where you received that resistance and then managed to talk your way through that resistance and result in some kind of change?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to necessarily point to a specific organization,
you can keep
but
it completely,
okay.
Completely
There is an
I would expect as
environmental,
much.
yeah, there is an environmental organization that was actually the exact conversation this year. They said, we're looking into this, but we're gonna try it, next year. And I was like, well, why not just try it now? And here's some language you could pitch to your board. And they were like, okay, and they did it, and they ended up adopting the policy. So that was really nice to see.
So that's then really about tools as well, not necessarily just about resistance, but feeling that one has the language and the words and the ideas. Because I guess there's a sense of reluctance of entering into a conflict, especially this year, where people feel like everything is uncertain, and there's been a lot of cracks in the system that have suddenly need all kinds of attention. How are we going to work at home? How are we going to that kind of thing. That's interesting.
And that's why I think this idea is so powerful, because it's something everyone can do from home. You can send an email or get on the phone with anybody you work with, you go to school with, places you eat at, to have this conversation with them. It's not something that necessarily we need to be, going out to do.
I want to move to our next question. This one is, how do you deal with organizations that don't currently have a single veg option and feel that it's more work to prepare meatless without compromising on proteins, nutrition, or having to deal with clients such as parents and schools? So that's really right in the heart of it, right? So there's a conversation there about nutrition. There's a conversation there about how you deal with the conflict and expectations of parents or clients. How would you address that?
Yeah, let me just reread that question really. Oh, it's gone. So yeah, I would say thank you. How to deal with organizations that don't currently have a single option and feel like it's more work to prepare meatless without. Okay, so I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first is organizations that don't even have a single veg option. I do have to say that because default veg is a much more radical shift than just like getting one veg option on the menu, I don't tend to work with folks that like aren't even at that point, because I want to work with people that are already engaged in this idea of plant-based eating and understand that it's the right thing to do for the environment and want to adopt more plant-based meals. And so there are probably places that already, that are really excited that they already have something on the menu. And I'm saying, okay, well, you have 11 items on your menu, only 2 of them are plant-based. How could we make that closer to 6? How can we make that closer to the majority of the menu as opposed to the minority of the menu? But I will say that if there are organizations you're working with that don't even have a single option, I would definitely start with just that ask. Just saying, okay, how can we get a plant-based option on the menu? Seeing how well it sells, seeing if it's bringing new customers in. And then as that starts to do well and management starts to see, oh, this is a great idea, and we are, being able to adapt to having more consumers and people come to our cafe or restaurant, then you can push the idea of default veg. But I think that's the first step. And then in terms of working with parents and clients, again, my role is normally somebody's coming to me and saying, I have this passion, I have this drive. How can you help me get default veg implemented at my school? So it's less of me doing just cold outreach to places. I'm normally working, like you said, from the inside out and getting somebody who's already passionate about those issues to drive this forward wherever they are, because that feels to our organization like it's the more successful approach, because it's actually going to stick with that organization, even when, I'm not pushing them to do something, because that person or that policy is there and already in place.
It's really interesting what you're pointing out, because there's clearly more here than the behavioral change is also requires a certain amount of community readiness, that that language is available, that people feel that they can enter a conversation and diffuse all those moments of potential conflict versus some of the skills that you're giving them. That's sort of where Arturo is leading in his next question. He asks, how can I approach my local cafe, school, or restaurant as an individual? And what should I think about before giving my elevator pitch? And I know you just said that a lot of this information is available in your videos and in the support you provide. But if you were to provide the short version of that answer, Arturo is sort of thinking about that first moment of contact.
Yeah. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I give is to always approach the conversation out of a place of curiosity. So let's say you're going to your local restaurant. You can say, I love your food. I'm really interested in sustainability. What are some sustainability initiatives that you've taken as a restaurant within the past few years? And normally people are going to be so excited to tell you about their composting. They got rid of styrofoam. They're not using plastic straws. And so giving folks that opportunity to show you that they are aligned with you. They might not be where you are in terms of having that many plant-based options available, but that they do care about sustainability. It's a really nice segue to be like, okay, so I know we're both on the same page about waste reduction. Did you know that there is this much waste when you're serving chicken? Like, for example, with that statistic I gave. So coming at it from that approach, and normally people are then much more willing to listen to what you have to say when it's not coming into a conversation being like, you only have one plant-based option on your menu. It should be half the menu. Read this form, and so to kind of like diffuse that sort of tension, because there is normally tension when I'm talking about this stuff with folks, but I've seen it just go away when you ask them what their interests and passions are about sustainability first. And then from there, it's more of like a conversation I'd like to have one-on-one with folks of, okay, what is this restaurant? What are you trying to achieve? And then get into more of the weeds. But that would be my one biggest piece of advice to get started.
This next question is the extension of what you're speaking about. So if there's a values conversation attached, or is this about how much waste there is, or what you're telling us is that there are 1,000 different ways to connect, and you have to find the thing that is meaningful to whoever you're speaking to. LB asks, what about the socioeconomic aspect? Shifting to default veg is likely to create more jobs for farmers and the food sector generally. Is the job and social justice argument something that you've come across? And if so, how do you address it?
That's a great question. I can't say that I've really thought about that idea of creating more jobs. I think that's a great one that I just haven't probably looked into enough. So I don't have I haven't had the data to be able to go into a conversation and talk about that. But from a social justice aspect, especially, I talk about environmental racism and how it's mainly people in poverty and people of color that are working in factory farms that are having to live around factory farms and suffer much greater rates of disease and illness, especially with COVID, we've seen that. And so I definitely talk about that this issue is not, is connected to so many things. It's connected to racial injustices. It's connected to animals. It's connected to our planet. It's connected to public health. And so I do try to bring that into the conversation as much as I can. Again, normally if somebody brings that up, that is an issue that they're passionate about as a way that I can help them align their food choices with those values they have as an organization.
It's interesting when I look at the questions. Oh, by the way, there's one here that says digital class for Ilana, default veg. Bravo!
Thank you.
That's really nice. The next one, it's really interesting that people keep going back to places like schools, cafes, restaurants, because you have spoken about so many different places where this conversation can happen, but a lot of our participants keep taking it to these community food spaces where we are sharing a space where there seem to be options, but not necessarily the options that reflect their values. I find that seems to be a very at least in this conversation, seems to be resonating with people. NA asks, at local schools, we've tried to challenge pizza days or other junk food in quotation marks options for special days and promote vegan or vegetarian options. But if I understand you, there is a need to, that there needs to be a sense of choice instead of winning a battle. So either or.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I talk about that a lot. So first thing is, let's say pizza day is the most popular thing at school. If you're going to challenge pizza day, nobody's going to want to do it, right? They're going to see default veg as a complete opposite to pizza day because it's taking away something that they really like. And so I would say, I don't know that situation specifically, but is there a vegan pizza option that you can really highlight and recommend and say, this is the new option we're trying today? If you want pizza with dairy, cheese, or meat, like check this box, email this person. That's one way to go about it. But it's also saying, maybe let's leave pizza day as it is because everyone loves that right now and go for the lower hanging fruit. Let's actually look at the menu we're serving every day and see if instead of 2 meat options served and you have to request something else, let's get a plant-based option served every other day. So kind of looking for those things that people aren't so attached to, maybe like the big thing that the school does, and trying to get that reduction in other ways, because it doesn't matter where you're doing the reducing. It just matters that you're getting it done. And so sometimes coming directly in contrast with something that people really love can be the approach that's the most difficult, but there's also ways to get around that, like I said, with vegan pizza or with another really exciting option. So I hope that answered your question.
That did. It certainly did. I find it so interesting that the deeper we get into this, how much strategy is involved in there isn't just a one fix, a one conversation. It's about measuring who you're speaking to, where they're at, what they cherish, trying not to take away what they cherish. It's a really fascinating thought process behind what on the surface looks like a conversational tactic to shift behavior, but actually you really have to intuit a lot about where the other person is at. Oh, it's really exciting. Like the psychology of it is really fascinating.
Thank you. And that's why we're here, right? Because we want to help folks. Like if you come to us as an ambassador, you're doing such an amazing thing promoting this on campus or promoting this at a restaurant. And then we're here to help you frame that conversation and think about it for ways that you might not have thought were, helpful.
It's got to be the kindest version of battle I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
I want to go to the next question. This is from Wael, who says, can we apply some principles of the larger built environment? So with restaurants, healthcare institutions, and grocery stores. The larger built, I want to make sure I've understood how that question, are you understanding that question, Ilana?
I think for like larger institutions, maybe like dining
like
halls,
the application of this in those larger.
Yeah,
I think you must be right. Like larger hospital systems, larger grocery stores. So out of those intimate spaces that we were talking about, the cafes and the school cafeteria, and into the larger players. While I hope we've understood your question correctly, Ilana, how would you speak to that?
Yeah, so grocery stores, I will say, is something we haven't gotten into because that just seems like a whole other beast. But in terms of healthcare institutions, university dining halls, I have spoken with a few people. I was just on a call last week with someone at a university in their medical facility, their dining hall, and kind of thinking through some options. So when we're talking about a big dining hall going default veg, that's always going to be a difficult conversation, especially when you're working with a large food service provider like Aramark or Sodexo. It's a little bit different when you're working with an independent contractor because there are certain things that you can do, or an independent food service provider, sorry. So one of the main things I'll pitch there is, instead of talking about the whole dining hall going default veg, because people are like deer in the headlights, we can never do that. I say, well, why don't we start with defaulting to plant-based mayo? Defaulting to plant-based butter, looking at your baked goods and using plant-based milks. And so doing that substitution to make foods more inclusive. For example, if you're using all plant-based mayo, you don't have to worry about egg allergies. If you have sandwiches that are vegetarian that would have otherwise been vegan without the mayo, now they're all plant-based, so they're fitting two different crowds. And so I say that idea of, let's start with default veg with one product, and we will recognize institutions for making that shift. Because when you're talking about something as large as a healthcare institution or a university, even making that one product shift is a big deal.
Oh, that's interesting, because now we're talking about an even further step in the conversation, which is how we respond when that vegetarian or vegan option is made available, and also supporting it from that end and applauding it and showing that it's something positive. That's interesting. So there's really a kind of holistic strategy here that begins with an assessment of your environment, and then and closes hopefully with some kind of shift that you then applaud to encourage that behavior. It's not that different from parenting in some ways. I want to go. We have two last questions that I hope we'll be able to squeeze in before 12 o'clock or 6 p.m. in Eastern time, but we are closing in fast. This is from Becky. Sodexo just announced that they've concluded animal products are responsible for at least 70% of emissions from its supply chain. It plans to set targets to reduce these emissions by shifting towards plants. Yay! It's not really a question, but Becky is inviting you to comment.
Yeah, so I did see that announcement the other day, and I actually have it starred in my inbox to look through. So some of the things that I've seen places make are to say, animal products are responsible for XYZ, so we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by X. What unintended consequence that can sometimes have is that people reduce beef and increase chicken and fish. And I don't like to see that happen, because I really think that takes away from the messaging of all of the other issues that are associated with chicken and fish that I don't have a ton of time to get into today. So I really want to look more at their language and see if it specifically says that they will be decreasing animal product volume, period, not just trying to get their greenhouse gas emissions down a certain amount. But I think overall it is a step in the right direction, because all of their language is talking about plant-based, plant-forward. And it's really the first statement I've seen from a large food service provider to do something like that. So I really hope that it's going to end up replacing animal products with plants and not replacing animal products with different animal products.
I see. Robert, I'm going to try so hard to get to your question. I see it just got added. We are closing in fast. DP has asked, it seems Default Veg is optional for partnering with civil society organizations as a plug and play initiative for them. Can you speak to your collaboration with other actors, and what would you like to see more of?
We've definitely had other organizations that we're partnering with. For example, Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, that some of you may know of, has an internship program. And so we're working with their interns, and they can work on Default Veg if they want to. So that's an example. I'm trying to think of other actors. What I would like to see more of is environmental and health organizations really coming out and choosing to implement an internal food policy that shows that they are not just supporting plant-based initiatives when there is a petition out there or an event coming up for someone else, but that they're really taking those values to heart and implementing it with their own employees. Because what happens when you do something like that is the employees are doing it and seeing it. They might be able to implement it somewhere else, and they're living those values. I'd especially like to see this with younger generations in universities and K through 12 schools, so that it becomes more normalized, because we have this amazing opportunity right now to shift our norms and change what the next generation is going to see as our default option. And I think the more we can do that, the better.
I have a very spicy little question for our very last one. So I am sorry to
Okay.
push you into a 1 minute answer on something that does have a
Oh
lot of
boy.
depth in it.
Uh-huh.
1 to 2 minutes. How about that?
Yeah.
But it is an interesting question. Does default veg, or don't you think that default veg goes against governmental policies, since meat and dairy are most heavily subsidized by nationally promoted, for example, milk for schools programs? So that won't be the case for all the countries that are participating today,
Mhm.
but definitely in some countries, default veg. I think Robert is asking, does it really set you against power holders and set you against government policy?
Yeah, I mean, of course it does, right? But we're trying to shift. That is what we're trying to shift. I think a lot of this conversation does deal with higher level subsidies, because as long as we continue to subsidize animal feed, meat products are going to be very cheap. And unless people shift their diets, which is what we're trying to do with default veg, or at least in large group settings, that becomes more normalized, it is going to be against that. But for example, K through 12 schools in the US, like you said, the milk subsidy issue, when I'm working with a K through 12 school, I'm trying to get the staff and the parents and all of the organization or meetings and events kind of surrounding that lunch program to go default veg first. So I'm saying that for office meetings, for any time the parents bring in something for the kids, let's get that to go default veg first. Let's get it kind of integrated in the community, and then see what can be done with the school lunch program. Because, right, I'm not going to spend my time like fighting something like getting rid of dairy milk. That's not going to happen because of subsidies. So you're right. It's definitely an uphill battle that we are continually climbing and trying to find ways around, and just implementing as much as we can with the system that currently exists, and also trying to change that system.
Lana, thank you so much for that answer, for all your answers today. It's just an incredible amount of information and strategy, and rethinking a lot of those relationships in our communities and political spaces. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.